Yeah, so Daniel Perry did nothing wrong. If you're not aware of this story yet, it was all the way back in the summer of love, everybody's favourite summer that they ever lived through, 2020, the summer of Floyd, where St. George, he smiled down upon the burning flames and destroyed cities and mostly derelict black businesses.
It was a pretty horrible time.
It was pretty great. Not gonna lie.
No.
No, it was obviously a horrible time. It wasn't anybody's favourite summer, in particular Garrett Foster, who was a BLM protester who ended up getting himself shot whilst protesting on the streets of Austin, Texas, by a man called Daniel Perry. Initially, it seems that this case was not really going to go any further because the police who investigated it recognized it as a case of clear self-defense, but he was indicted by the Texas District Attorney, and recently the trial went through, and he has come out the other side as being convicted by a jury of his peers as guilty of murder. Not of aggravated assault, but guilty of murder, and could be facing up to a lifetime in prison. He has not reached the sentencing stage as of yet, so we don't know what the actual sentence is going to be, but it's not looking great for him. Apart from until Greg Abbott has stood in and seems to be on the verge of just outright pardoning him straight away. I'm not entirely sure how the pardoning system works in Texas, because Greg Abbott, I think, has to go through some kind of council of people to make sure it gets pardoned, but I think Abbott himself picks the people who end up on that committee. So they're probably just going to do what he asks them to. But I'll go through the details, and if you've not heard of this story, you can make up your mind yourself whether it was justified to convict him as guilty, or whether, as I believe, this was a clear-cut case of self-defense. Before I get into those details, though, Rory and I did a very fun hangout on Friday afternoon last week that's for our premium subscribers, so £5 a month at the least, and you can access all of the excellent work that we do on the website. But Rory and I were addressing the Zoomer question, and Rory's not somebody who appears on the podcast or on the premium content very often. He does edit for us, and he does write some articles for us, but it's always nice when he makes a face appearance on here, and I think we had a really good chat. We did not answer the Zoomer question. We did not find any solutions to the Zoomer question as of yet, but
Don't think there was one, but
yeah, that's coming from a Zoomer like yourself, though. So,
okay.
Although to be fair, technically I'm a Zoomer as well. But I think it was a really interesting question.
Self-hating Zoomers, dime a dozen.
We were analysing why Zoomers are the way that they are, and what the cultural and environmental situation they grew up in is that caused them to be that way. So check that out, please, and let's move on to it. So I got this Guardian article just so we can go over some of the basics of it. So Daniel Perry himself is a US Army sergeant, and he was a rideshare service driver at the time. I believe he was driving for Uber at the time, so he was just picking people up around Austin, Texas, doing Uber driver things, driving them to where they need to go.
He's a cop, and then on the side he does Uber.
Well, no, he's an Army sergeant.
Okay, sorry. I don't know what that is.
But close enough. And
does that mean he's in the army, or does that mean he's... Why is he an Uber driver then?
I think he was just doing it on the side.
Okay.
And I think there was question of whether he should have been doing it on the side, but, if he needed to make a bit of extra money, then,
right.
Why not? But he'd been found guilty of murder of a protester during a Black Lives Matter rally in 2020 in Austin, Texas. It was an 8-day trial, 2 days of verdict deliberations. I think overall it was about 17 hours. So they took the time with it, of a jury in Travis County, Texas. Now, Travis County will be important because Travis County is one of the most liberal, I think it is the most liberal area in all of Texas. When I looked into it, it's the only place in 2020 that had majority of people there voting for Biden at 71% compared to all the other candidates. So yeah, very, very liberal, and that may have played a part in why it was that he was found guilty. Perry was driving for Uber in downtown Austin, where Foster was participating in a Black Lives Matter rally on the night of the shooting on July 25th, 2020. According to the police, Perry stopped and honked at the protesters as they walked through the streets before driving his car into the crowd, which was according to the Texas Tribune. Perry's attorneys argued that he was forced to shoot Foster 5 times in self-defense after Foster approached his car with an AK-47. So he was just casually wandering about this protest with an AK-47. Meanwhile, prosecutors contended that Perry had other options during the situation, including driving away before he fired his own gun at Foster, which, if you're in a situation, as far as I'm concerned, where a man who is part of a crowd who, as we will find out, is attacking your car, approaches you with a rifle, you're not going to want to take the chance of just, I'll just drive away. AK-47s, they're not known for having, rounds that pierce cars or anything.
Well, even then, he's just going to point it through your window.
Potentially, yes. And during the trial, Austin Police Detective William Bursley testified about evidence found on Perry's cell phone. Part of the evidence included online searches for protest tonight, protesters in Seattle get shot, riot shootouts, and protests in Dallas live. And it's not, of course you would never, as an Uber driver, want to be looking into things like whether there have been protests tonight or protests in the state that you're in, because, that would never affect your job. So this is obviously a smoking gun of intent that he wanted to go out there and shoot somebody in fake self-defense, as we'll find out through some of the prosecutions.
Yeah, I don't really know how that's relevant.
Yeah, some of the well, that's the thing that a lot of people, it's like self-defense attorneys, have been talking about after this verdict have come through, which is none of this should have been admitted as relevant to the case in the first place, because all that matters is the situation that he found himself in. So, just to give some character idea of who this Garrett Foster person was, the man who he shot, and I'm not saying that, this guy deserved to be shot or anything, but I am saying he put himself in a situation where it was very likely that he would be shot. Here is some footage of him before the shooting, where he's going around telling people why it is that he's at the event and why it is that he's carrying a gun.
Oh, it's AK-47.
What you got it out tonight?
They don't let us march in the streets anymore, so gotta practice some of our rights.
Cool, man. Do you feel like you'll need to use it?
Nah, I think if I use it against the cops, I'm dead. And I think all the people that hate us and, want to say shit to us are too big of pussies to stop and actually do anything about it. So,
Why'd you start carrying?
well, our roommate got arrested and they stopped letting us march anywhere, so started carrying.
And you can pause it there, John. Yeah, so sorry about the text that was on the screen. If you're wondering, that music in the background was just playing in the background while he was being interviewed by whoever was doing the filming there. So what he was saying, if I use the gun against the cops, I'm dead, but anybody else is too big a pussy to do anything about it. So he's basically saying, I'm carrying this gun so I can just bully normal people. That's the vibe that I got from it.
I could steelman his position, say he's exercising his rights, which is true. It's really weird always coming from left wingers when they won't talk about gun rights because it's not coherent, but...
Well, no, it is coherent for them because they want guns for them so that they can fight back against right-wingers. That's always the logic. That's the only logic it really
It's not to defend ourselves from the state, it's so we can be the state.
Pretty much. I mean, he was also affiliated, just to say, I'm not entirely sure if you would describe him as a left-winger, even though he was marching with BLM, but he was known in the Libertarian Party of Texas, and he contributed with them. So when it did post up a picture of his old Instagram, which had lots of anti-police rhetoric on it, you may have seen a Gadsden flag on there.
Yeah, you get that from both sides.
Yeah, you can get that from both sides. But what I got from that was that he's basically just carrying it so that he can look tough and intimidate normal people who might want to say, hey, can you please stop protesting on my street, please? But either way, that was Garrett, and here we have the shooting from two different angles. Now, it is going to be difficult to tell, but if you go on the full screen for me, please, John. For anybody who is watching this, if you're listening, you'll just have to take my description of it. On the right here, on the right screen, on the left here, on the left screen, the car that Daniel Perry was driving will be approaching from the right-hand side of that screen, and on the right-hand side of the screen, in this right video, it'll be arriving from around the middle. So this intersection, this junction, they'll be going around. He'll be going across and then stopping in the middle of the road, and then we'll hear the gunshot. So if you could play that for me. Oh, have we not got any audio for this, John?
I guess not. We'll just...
Oh, here we go.
Every time. Every time. Every time. Every time.
So his car is just honking his horn. He's just gone around. You can see the red lights there. Everybody is starting to surround the car. And there's the shots. And then everybody runs.
Do you know if that's them returning fire?
That is them returning fire. All right. So what it appeared to me, and what it appears to most people who watch that, is that he was just trying to get along. He did run a red light, and there's a protest going on. He needs to get somewhere. Who knows why he ran the red light? I think there is some talk that he might have been on his phone, so he might not have been paying attention. But he goes across, he honks his horn, stops. Everybody starts to surround him, starts beating on his car. This guy approaches, and supposedly raises up his rifle at the guy. The barrel of his gun starts to rise a little bit. Guy thinks, I'm about to get shot in the face. Bang.
Sure. I mean, I can't tell any of that from the footage.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I do know that there are other video footage that was taken at the time, but I don't know that it's been released to the public.
All right.
It was used in the trial, but having looked into this, the trial has not been fully televised, or at least anywhere that I could find it. It's not been on YouTube, for instance. So there's been reports from local television stations, but as far as I'm concerned, from what I could tell there and from what the descriptions that I've seen and the testimony that I have heard, it does seem that he was in a situation where I would certainly feel threatened. This gang of protesters just immediately started to swarm around his car, started beating on it. The prosecutors, I think, some of the investigators took about 24 sets of fingerprints from it, and some of the people in the testimony admitted to having started to kick and beat his car, and you get this guy walking up to you who's got a gun in his hand that seems to be about to raise to you.
Sure, if that's the circumstance. I can't tell it from that video.
Well, yeah, of course, the video
Taking your
itself
word
is pretty difficult.
I assume the witness statements for what you just said being the case.
That's the reporting that I've seen from it. At the time, let's hear what the attorney that was representing him had to say on the matter.
Somebody sees an assault rifle being raised at them, they're not going to wait until the assault rifle gets 90 degrees to see what the person's going to shoot. If they're in a position to defend themselves, they're going to do it.
Perry was driving for a rideshare company that night. After dropping someone off, his lawyer says Perry turned onto Congress Avenue, where he was met with Black Lives Matter demonstrators. Protesters say he sped toward the crowd, and Broden says Foster raised his rifle toward Perry.
Sergeant Perry thought he might be law enforcement, given that he was carrying an assault rifle. And, even though this is Texas, you don't expect to see people in the middle of the street with assault rifles.
After the shooting, Perry called 911. Police questioned him and released him.
Sergeant Perry goes to work every day, has gone to work for the last 8 years to defend our Constitution. And part of that Constitution is the First Amendment, which allows the right for peaceful protests.
Perry is an active duty Army sergeant stationed at Fort Hood. Court records show he has a misdemeanor assault charge from 2005 in Dallas County. Perry's Twitter account was deactivated after tweets surfaced showing Perry's opposition to other recent protests. Broden says the case shouldn't be about social media. Friends say Foster was a constant fixture at Austin's protests, often seen pushing his fiancée Whitney in a wheelchair.
Okay, don't know why any of that has to do with the case, but sure.
Yeah, well,
just the bit at the end though, so he was a nice guy. I was like,
that's always the case. Well, you want to get the character witnesses in for the actual person who was killed, so that you can get the jury to get all teary-eyed about it.
I just always hate that about American law. Where they're always talking about.
That's what they do.
Don't you know he was a nice guy? I'm like, I don't care. Was he a criminal?
He was a nice guy. He was turning his life around. That's whenever it's a black guy who gets shot. He was turning his life around. He was starting to contribute into the local community. Yeah, he may have robbed and murdered people 20 years ago, but he just got off meth.
Last week.
Yeah, last week. He just relapsed this one time. Okay. Yeah, that's always the story. But then there is some more footage that's been released from the jury, from the trial itself. The first one is an analysis of the shooting through videos and 3D rendering that was done here. So if we can play this.
Through a laser scan of 4th and Congress, Jason Evans, a forensic engineer, was able to create a 3D rendering of 4th and Congress. And through a series of 5 photos and videos taken the night of July 25, 2020, he created a recreation of the incident, starting with Perry turning into the crowd of protesters.
Mr. Perry starts off initially at 11.9 miles per hour, starts to deaccelerate or slow down to the apex of the turn to 9.8 miles per hour, and then continues to slow down until he comes to a stop.
Evans was also able to give a rendering of how close Foster might have been standing to Perry's driver's side door before Perry shot and killed him.
We were able to show and accurately know that at a tenth of a second before the first shot fired, that Mr. Foster was 18 inches from the driver's door.
And also how Perry might have seen Foster through his driver's side door. This part of the analysis based on one cell phone video from that night.
We were ultimately able to show that you were able to see Mr. Foster from the area of his mid-thigh all the way to the top of his head.
The state argued this analysis, mentioning Foster looks like he's almost fully upright when at Perry's window, when previous testimony from the medical examiner who performed Foster's autopsy claimed otherwise based on his gunshot wounds.
If I told you that there was testimony before this jury that the trajectory of Mr. Foster's wounds were all downward, going across his body in a downward. Would that change your analysis in any way?
Again, we didn't do any trajectory analysis.
The state also questioned Evans' analysis of how close Foster was standing if a video from that night shows he's moving when the first muzzle flash goes off.
I know in our analysis, we determined that frame from our 20-second clip showed both of his feet on the ground in that one frame.
A response that resulted a back and forth.
If you're going to ask me an opinion about a video, I need to understand.
Excuse me, one at a time.
In the end, Evans stood by his analysis, claiming he was extremely confident in the accuracy of his testimony.
Yes, there is some error associated with this, but there is not a basic quantifiable calculation to give you an exact measurement.
So yeah, typical back and forth going on in the trial there, but I think it does show there what was going on is that you do have other footage at much better angles of what actually happened in the shooting.
We could see a small amount there.
Yeah, that we just don't have access to in the public. Supposedly, the district attorney did prevent a lot of evidence being put in by the defense for the trial. The defense say would have been able to, help his case, but we don't know exactly why, other than the fact that the district attorney is supposedly Soros-backed, which is why he got this indictment in the first place. Then the second one we've got here is just footage from the initial interview that the police did with Perry after he was arrested, where you can see his realization that, the guy that I shot, he says, I was just trying to get him to go away, just wanted to incapacitate him, I didn't want to kill him, but you got to do what you got to do if you feel like you're in a situation where you're about to get shot in the face, and realizes the guy is dead. So let's play this.
I know this is a really stressful time. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, he's dead, oh God.
Footage of Daniel Perry's police interview after he killed Garrett Foster was played in the courtroom during his murder trial. Former Austin Police homicide detective David Fugit was the one to conduct the interview with Perry. In it, Detective Fugit had Perry demonstrate how Foster carried his rifle.
How high did that barrel come up? We're not worried about right there. Okay, was it aimed at you? I believe it was aimed at me. I believe he was going to aim it at me. I didn't want to give him a chance to aim at me,
And then what Perry did while he was sitting in the driver's seat.
That quick, yeah. It's like a big event rusher. I don't want to get shot, so.
Perry said he shot 5 times. He believes the whole encounter was less than 15 seconds.
Where did you shoot it? Still not masked.
Sometime after the interview, Perry called Detective Fugit to find out more information for his lawyer, reiterating that he was scared but, quote, felt bad.
He was a person. I feel bad, I just wish to tell it differently, I honestly did not want him to die. All I wanted to do was to incapacitate him.
Yeah, so you can get a good idea of how he was feeling and what we was talking about there, and presumably his mindset of the situation. Once again, if I was in a situation like that, I would be pretty frightened.
Yeah, I mean, it's more the fundamental case of, let's say you're driving a car, you end up in a protest, and a whole bunch of people surround you. I mean, do you have the right...
Start beating on your car.
Yeah, if someone assaults you with something that can kill you and looks like they're going to kill you, should you have the right to shoot them? I think it's a more fundamental argument about the self-defense case there, isn't it?
Well, in Texas, I'm aware that they do have pretty strong stand-your-ground laws.
Someone threatens you, you can...
Someone threatens you, or you feel like they're approaching you with intent to kill, or wound you, then you can fight back. And I would feel that way in a situation. The last bit of footage was just after he was found guilty. I think this clip that I've got includes a little bit more information as to why exactly he was found guilty.
Perry's mother instantly leaned over and began sobbing, Perry even losing it himself. Apparent shock on both sides. Some legal experts I spoke to ahead of the trial telling me they even thought Perry was likely to be found not guilty, saying the state would not be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Perry acted in self-defense. Now, it's hard to say what it could have been that led jurors to make this decision, but one of the strongest pieces of evidence from the state, private Facebook messages between Perry and his friend talking about an eerily similar situation in Seattle where a driver shot and killed a protester after driving into the crowd just 6 weeks before Perry shot and killed Foster. Here's what Foster's family had to say after the verdict.
Very sorry for his family as well. There's no winners in this, and just glad it's over.
All right, so the evidence that was mainly used to push that he was guilty of it and not just engaged in a self-defense scenario, they didn't even make the argument that really he just put himself in a stupid situation and reacted rashly and self-defense shouldn't count in that. They're saying that it was basically premeditated and intentional because of these private Facebook messages that he was sending to his friend that indicated that he might have wanted to go out and shoot these people, because he'd done Facebook posts and other such things saying, oh, tell the protesters to come to Texas and we'll show them that you don't protest like this in Texas, yada yada. Basically just, oh, I'm a big tough guy on social media posts.
S-posting.
Yeah, doesn't mean that you actually want to go and murder anybody, because if that is the case...
I would have thought the whole thing would have hinged on how much he raised his rifle. The guy was shot. Because
I did seem to play into it.
I would have thought the whole case would have been, well, he didn't actually raise it, therefore you killed this guy. I mean, that's a sensible argument in a sense of, okay, you may have been surrounded, but no one actually was threatening your life, and therefore you killed an innocent person. But if it's just, didn't you S-talk on Twitter.com? So, what does that got to do with this?
Exactly. So, from what I can tell, their logic is that he decided that he was going to intentionally kill some protesters.
He went out that night and went, oh boy, here I go killing again.
Yep. And so, therefore, he managed to contrive himself into a situation where he was surrounded by protesters, and it just so happened to be that the one protester who was openly carrying a deadly firearm, an AK-47, approached him, and then he shot that guy.
He got his one chance he was looking for.
Yeah, and it just happened to be the perfect chance that could also fall into the case of self-defense, and then drives away, and he's the one who calls the police on himself to tell them...
To cover it up.
I just shot a guy. Well, they did. I have seen people on social media saying, this guy knew exactly what he was doing. Of course he called the police straight away because he knew that they would take his side. Once again, when given all of this information, the initial lead investigator of the case just said, well, this is obvious self-defense. Given what the information that you've given, this is self-defense. We're not going to charge you with it. But it was the judge, the district attorney, I should say, that decided to indict him on this. And if I carry on, I did get a little bit more information on this, on the circumstances and some information regarding the self-defense laws in Texas from this, so you can check that video out. They also mentioned, once again, Travis County, probably the most liberal county in all of Texas in the first place, so he was going to be having a jury that was stacked against him. I think the judge in that county as well is a big Democrat, so he sadly did have the deck stacked against him from a self-defense standpoint. A lot of the people in the jury were likely to have maybe even been out in that protest that night, potentially, or at least agreed with the sentiments of the jury. But if we go along, so I found some more information from this person, Greg Price, was tweeting about it, saying the lead detective in the case concluded it was a justifiable homicide. So did the Austin Police Department, but the Soros-funded Travis County District Attorney, Jose Garcia, indicted him anyway and was accused by the detective of withholding evidence from the grand jury and witness tampering. Meanwhile, if you scroll down, the guy Daniel Perry fatally shot had a history of threatening people with rifles at the BLM protest. There was reports from a number of other police officers saying they'd had trouble with him, saying that he had been accused with a lot of other protesters of just sort of waving his gun around, trying to act like a big man. There's the Garrett Foster guy. And as I mentioned earlier, 24 sets of fingerprints were also found on Perry's car, showing that the mob was being anything but friendly. And if you actually watch some of the footage that came out from the trial, one of the people involved in it even admitted that, yeah, I kicked the car. And a lot of other people were doing similar things. So if you're in a situation where you're going to feel threatened, that would certainly be a situation where I would feel threatened. And like I said, Greg Abbott seems to be on the case. He's come out and just said he's working as swiftly as Texas laws allow regarding the pardoning of Daniel Perry, tweeting out this, saying Texas has one of the strongest stand-your-ground laws of self-defense that cannot be nullified by a jury or progressive district attorney. Unlike the president or some other states, the Texas Constitution limits the governor's pardon authority and can only act as a recommendation by the Board of Pardons and Paroles. Texas law does allow the governor to request the Board of Pardons and Paroles to determine if a person should be granted a pardon. I have made that request and instructed the board to expedite its review. I look forward to approving the board's pardon recommendation as soon as it hits my desk. Additionally, I have already prioritized reining in rogue district attorneys, and the Texas legislature is working on laws to achieve that goal. So we'll see what comes of that. I do think, personally, that Daniel Perry was in a situation where it can be justifiably considered as self-defense. Obviously, either way, it's a tragic situation. Garrett Foster is dead, his family's down a child, and his fiancée is, his wife is without her husband now. So it's altogether a tragic situation. But if I was put in that situation, I don't know if I could say that I would have acted any differently to him with his skill set.
I'm not convinced that it's murder, for sure.
No, absolutely.
I'm surprised the level of argument wasn't...
The whole point is you've got to prove that it's outside of a reasonable doubt. And I don't think there was really much of a case to prove that it was outside of a reasonable doubt that it was self-defense. And the mainstream narrative has already begun to form around this. You've got the Daily Beast saying Greg Abbott's pardon of Daniel Perry would be wrong and dangerous, and you've got Statesman and other publications coming out saying that it was just influential conservatives in the next one. Influential conservatives pushed Greg Abbott towards Daniel Perry pardon plan in under 24 hours. That's right, it's just the evil social media conservative pushers getting Greg Abbott to look at this case and go, hold up, this seems like rubbish. Even in the original
weird complaint is like, didn't you know right-wingers want right-wing politicians to do right-wing things?
I know, shocking. And even the Guardian article that I referenced at the start of this described Greg Abbott as an extremist governor. He's an extremist. Ooh, he doesn't want people going away under hostile juries with all this nonsense going on. So personally, I hope that Greg Abbott pardons him and that self-defense laws are shored up a little bit, because this nonsense shouldn't be allowed to keep happening.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this episode, and whether UFOs are possible. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.